The truth occurs. The truth occurs.
Hi everyone. Well, a lot of people have been concerned recently about what's going on with FEMA and their NLE11 exercises. It came out in January that FEMA buying emergency meals for possible New Madrid earthquake. FEMA was spending a lot of money buying a whole lot of supplies. I mean, so much that it was suspicious. They bought enough ready-made meals to feed, something like 7 million people. And at the same time, this year's national level exercises, or NLE11, centered around a hypothetical scenario involving earthquakes on the New Madrid fault zone. It seemed very strange. Is that a coincidence? They're doing an exercise and at the same time they're actually buying all this stuff as if they knew that a real disaster was coming. And another reason people are worried is that there's a history of FEMA and other agencies like DISA and stuff performing drills just coincidentally when there happens to actually be a disaster. Like on 9/11 they were doing a drill. Also they were doing drills on 7/7, the day of the London bombings, a scenario that was identical to the one that actually happened. Also Haiti earthquake, DISA was performing a drill based on a earthquake scenario. And the Christchurch quake, they were also having a conference about earthquake safety and doing some drills just right before this happened. And actually the conference attendees were flown out of the country half an hour before the earthquake hit. So that kind of stuff. So people are a little suspicious, when there are these exercises and drills, they think, maybe it's going to be the real thing because there's a history of that kind of thing happening. But okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here. First of all, they do exercises like this every year. Two, you would kind of expect an emergency, management agency to do drills because it is good to be prepared. Also, just because there's a history of drills occurring while there are false flags going on doesn't mean that every time they do a drill there's going to be a false flag. I'd like to point out though that it seems like every year when they have an NLE, people kind of freak out. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, NLE09, people were freaking out thinking they were going to do a false flag and they didn't end up doing it. So I just like to look at the history of the NLEs a little bit. So here's the DHS website and they're talking about National Exercise Program. And you can see that actually this started with what was called the Top-Off program back in 2000. So in 2000, the Department of Justice, Department of State, and FEMA led the first top-off exercise. It says more than 6,500 federal, state, and local personnel, including top officials, responded to a simulated biological attack in Denver, Colorado, and a simulated chemical attack in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And then they did another top-off exercise in 2003, next one was in 2005 and 2007. So like every couple of years they did top-off. But here's something I noticed. The first year it was 6,500 people participating. The next time, in 2003, it was 8,500 participating. In 2005, it was 10,000 participants. Next, they started doing national level exercises. In 2009, it was the first major exercise conducted by the US government that focused exclusively on terrorism prevention and protection, as opposed to incident response and recovery. And they did one in 2009, in 2010, and now in 2011. But did you notice that the amount of participants increased every year? So now in 2011, administration officials joined millions of Americans in public earthquake drill. That's right. 10 years later and there are millions of people involved. Back to basics, Homeland Security to conduct multi-state earthquake drill. In this article they'll explain that the scenario is an 8.2 earthquake that strikes Middle America, and that 2.5 million people have committed to taking part in Thursday's drill, in which participants will be told how to react in the event of an earthquake. And what DHS was telling people to do was drop cover and hold until the shaking stops, which the writer of this article points out that sounds more like advice from a 1955 sex ed manual than earthquake preparedness information it took an entire department of government to come up with, but hey, whatever works. Well, it does sound a bit silly, doesn't it? Is that all they could come up with? I kind of tend to think that the goal here is to just get the public used to doing these drills. I mean, look, every year they got more and more people involved. We're up to 2 million now, or well, Americans are up to 2.5 million. I wouldn't be surprised if down the road they're going to have this kind of thing going on routinely every year, where maybe on one day, you know, all students in all schools are going to do the drop and cover thing, kind of like in the 1950s for atomic weapons, as if it would make a difference. And it's just like a kind of conditioning. That's not, you know, real disaster preparedness. I mean, do you really, like he says, you really have to spend all that money and have this big operation for drop, cover, and hold till the shaking stops? I think it's more of a psychological operation. It's just kind of an extension of the whole terrorism threat. Now there's also the natural disaster threat. Keep people in this state of fear and get them to cooperate in these kind of exercises. But as for the actual disaster, maybe they did know something, because as it turned out, this year was the worst tornado season since 1974. They had devastating tornadoes in Alabama and the surrounding states, and over 300 people have died. And one newspaper even went so far as to call it Alabama's 9/11, the day of the tornadoes. So what are they saying here? It was a false flag? And it's not over yet. Disaster on heels of disaster, first tornadoes, now flooding. It says here, the mighty Mississippi is rising. More rain is expected in that part of the country. It is feared that the Mississippi might break all existing records when it crests. Upriver, where the Mississippi and Ohio join, the town of Cairo, Illinois, looks apocalyptic. So as it turns out, it was pretty bad for that area. Look at the area. See, this is where they had the tornadoes and storms, and now also the flooding. And this is the New Madrid fault zone, where FEMA was doing their exercises. Okay, it turned out it wasn't an earthquake, but they did have some major disasters. Did FEMA have advanced knowledge? I think that they do have advanced knowledge of things like the weather. So FEMA maybe really knew about this stuff. So why didn't they just tell people you're facing tornadoes and floods? You know, why go through this whole charade about the earthquakes? Maybe they just don't want people to know that they have advanced knowledge of the weather. Or maybe they want people to actually be in the disaster scenario so that they can use it as a kind of better drill. Or maybe, I'm just speculating here, they actually caused the disasters with some kind of weather modification technology. And maybe they're going to do more of this kind of stuff. And this is to implement something like Agenda 21 to get people out of the country and into concentrate into cities, sustainable development, because it's good for the environment. Or maybe they know something about the New Madrid fault zone, as in that there are going to be real earthquakes, and they're trying to herd people out of there without telling them the whole place is going to blow up. They're just going to do things like this to make it kind of inhabitable, and people will move out on their own volition without having to be told how serious the upcoming danger is, or without having to be, you know, forced. They're just going to end up having to do it. Totally hypothetical scenario. I just can't understand. If they knew, why didn't they tell people? Why didn't they help them prepare better? I don't get it. But I do know that they always have some kind of weird agenda at work, and it makes me suspicious. So back to the NLE11 and the fact that this drill coincided with an actual disaster in that very area. I mean, it does look suspicious. I'm not really sure what the purpose was, but it seems like I mentioned earlier, that part of the purpose of these drills is just to freak the public out and to get them used to having to participate in drills concerning, you know, hypothetical disasters, which the government, if there were disasters coming, the government probably has advanced knowledge and probably, you know, also has the technology to create or avert these disasters. And then they, you know, they just don't tell everybody that. But that's what I think. And call me paranoid if you want. So it looks a bit suspicious what FEMA's doing. And a lot of people are concerned, but how concerned do we really have to be? I mean, isn't this kind of all about ramping up the fear? If we're so freaked out, aren't we just giving them exactly what they want? Well, thanks for listening to me, and I'll see you next time.
Well, it's been a couple of weeks and apocalypse hasn't come upon me yet, but I try not to let that discourage me. I'm still waiting down here. Although I have been getting kind of bored, to be honest with you. I kind of miss my cable TV, if you know what I mean.